Take it away, guys. Formally, the topic of our debate is what this
I don't think any of us know.
We're anarchists, why should we?
I think I was told that the topic was two very different views of anarchism. And I think that we can actually come through on our promise.
So we're going to do 15 minutes apiece. Walter, you're going to start? Okay. And then we'll do 5-minute rebuttals. And then we'll open it up for question and answers. So, Walter, you have 15 minutes. Go.
Please, everybody get chairs. There are chairs across the hall in the other rooms.
I had an introduction. I thought maybe we should get introduced.
He's John Clark, philosophy professor. I'm Walter Block, economics professor.
He's very efficient. He reduced all of this.
Let me start by saying that usually when I debate someone, I'm out follicled, but this time I've got him beat. On follicles. On a more serious note, what I plan to do is to give my views of anarchism and then to criticize his views of anarchism because mine are correct and his aren't. My view of anarchism is libertarian anarchism, and it stems from, you'll never guess what? Libertarianism. So what is libertarianism? Libertarianism is the view that the only way we should interact with each other is a voluntary way. That's the only way. That's a civilized way of interacting with each other. Any other way is barbaric. For example, I've just taken a liking to this young man's brown jacket. What's your name?
Thomas.
Thomas. I really like that brown jacket. Hold it up, wave it around. It's a great brown jacket, and I like it. And there are only two ways I can get it. One, I can come up to him with a gun and I say, give me that brown jacket or I'll shoot you. Or I could be a demagogue and I say, I'll convince everyone in the community that I should have that jacket, and we all vote for it, and yes, everyone says Block should have Thomas's jacket, and we all grab it from him and give it to me. These are barbaric, uncivilized ways of me getting the jacket. What are the civilized ways, or way? Voluntary. I say, I'll give you 10 bucks for it. He says no. I say, I'll give you 500 bucks for it, which is way more than I presume he bought it, but his grandmother gave it. It's got personal attachments. He says no again. I say, I'll be your best friend forever if you give me the jacket. He says no, amazingly. Well, then I just don't get the jacket. It's his jacket. That's libertarianism. Why do we oppose the government? Why do we libertarian anarchists oppose the government? Because the government is predicated on initiatory violence. Now, libertarians aren't pacifists. We believe in defense. We can use violence. If Tom comes and attacks me for mentioning his jacket, I have a right to fight him back. But you have no right to initiate violence, and it's his jacket, and if I just grab it from him or get it out of him by fraud or something like that, I'm in violation of the libertarian axiom. Government necessarily involves coercion. Government is a barbaric institution. They tax you. Come April 15th, you all have to pay your taxes. Thanks to Milton Friedman, we have withholding taxes, so it's not so painful, but we all have to pay taxes. Well, people say that taxes are voluntary. The IRS is always saying taxes are voluntary. But there's a threat there. If you don't fill out your voluntary tax form and pay the money that you owe, they'll send you a nice letter initially, and then they'll send you a nastier letter, and then some guy in a blue uniform with a badge and a gun is going to come say, you know, come with us, we're going to kidnap you, we're going to put you in jail. That's coercion. But wait, didn't we agree to it? Isn't the U.S. government like a club? Didn't we agree? Well, I must have missed that meeting when we all agreed. I didn't sign anything. Here's a quote from, what's his name, Schumpeter. The theory which construes taxes on the analogy of club dues or on the purchase of the services of, say, a doctor, only proves how far removed this part of the social science is from scientific habits of mind. Government is per se a coercive institution, and anyone who opposes the initiation of violence has to oppose government. But we all voted for taxes, or at least we voted for politicians who instituted them. The libertarian is not really a big fan of democracy. Hitler came to power through a democratic process. There is such a thing as the tyranny of the majority. If I can demagogue you and all get you to agree with me that I should have Thomas's jacket, that doesn't make it right just because it's democratic. So even if we voted for it, Spooner says, you know, you vote for the lesser of two evils, it doesn't mean you agree to be coerced. If you're faced with a really nasty slave master and a nicer slave master, and you vote for the nice slave master who whips you a little less, that doesn't mean you agree to it. It means you're taking the least of two horrible things. Another argument is if you don't like it, you leave. But that assumes the very point in question. Who are they to tell us to leave? We've been here before they were. They started in 1776. There were people here before 1776 who didn't sign on any agreement with them. So I reject that argument. Here is a flaw in the limited government philosophy. The limited government philosophy would be anarchists or people who believe in government, as I do not. For example, if we don't have a government, then Thomas and, what's her name again? I'm sorry. Yes? Kenny. Thomas and Kenny will have a fight. Thomas and Kenny will have a fight, and therefore me, the government, I have to stop them from fighting each other. Well, if that's true, right now Canada and Portugal are in a state of anarchy with each other in the sense that there's no government over them. China and Mexico could fight. Any two countries could fight, any two bunches of people could fight. So if you believe in government because local citizens will fight with each other, then you have to believe in world government because countries can fight with each other. Just because people can fight with each other doesn't mean that you should be able to use coercion and force people to pay taxes in order to stop these fights. There are other ways to stop fights beside that. Another argument, beloved of left-wing economists, is public goods. There are certain things that only government can do. And they usually use roads, armies, defense, courts, things like that. But anything that government does, everything that government does, well, with some exceptions, mass murder, has been done by private enterprise. Private enterprises have courts. There are private roads. There were private roads before we had socialist roads. So I reject that argument as well. Another one is that most libertarians are statists. That's true. Most libertarians are not anarchists. Most libertarians are what we call minarchists. They believe in armies, courts, and police run by government and everything else privatized. This would be the position of Ayn Rand and maybe Robert Nozick, people like that. But I think that the anarchist libertarian view is the correct view, and this is almost the correct view because even when you limit government to these few functions, still they're financing it on the basis of coercion. And we've established, or at least to my satisfaction, that initiatory coercion against innocent people is not good. It's not civilized. It's barbaric. Some people say, well, you know, bomb-throwing anarchists. You know, anarchists have the reputation for bomb-throwing. Well, there are certain anarchists who are bad guys and they throw bombs at innocent people. I don't deny that. But when it comes to killing innocent people, it's the government that kills people en masse. There's this guy, Rummel, Courtois, Rummel, and Conquest are the three people that have done studies on numbers of people that governments have killed of their own citizens. And according to them, 170 million people were killed in the last century by governments, and not just wars. Well, this is apart from wars. They've killed many other people by getting involved in wars, but just killing their own people. Mao, for example, killed about 60 million people. Stalin, about 20 million people, of his own people. Hitler, about 11 million, 6 million Jews and 5 million black people, gay people, gypsies, and other people that weren't pure Aryans. Pol Pot only killed 2 million, he's a piker, but he killed the highest percentage of his population. So he gets credit for that. Well, these are mass murderers. Private enterprise killers, yes, there are a few. There are people that kill each other over drugs, but that's because we have drug prohibition. If we legalize drugs, look, we used to have a lot of people killing each other over alcohol during prohibition of alcohol. If we legalized drugs, nobody kills anyone over alcohol nowadays. No one would kill anyone over drugs if drugs were legalized, as they were before 1917 and as they will be one day. And who is prohibiting drugs? I'll give you one guess. Government. So government is the bad guy. One of my own pet peeves or fetishes or whatever is roads. We have some 40,000 people dying on the nation's highways. Guess who provides the nation's highways? Government. Now, people say, well, it's really speeding or vehicle malfunction or driver error, but in my view, and I have a book on this, and I don't know if I have time to go into this fully. In this venue, maybe during the question period, I claim that government is responsible for these 40,000 road deaths. And when you add those road deaths, as Courtois, Rummel, and Conquest don't, you get even greater statistics. I'm running out of time, so instead of continuing on how would anarchy work and how would we have a private court defense industry, let me take a few jabs at what I think my colleague John Clark will be saying. I think he'll be taking the views of people like Chomsky and Kropotkin and other socialist anarchists. He'll correct me if I misconstrue him, but let me give you a few comments. Chomsky, the socialist, he calls himself an anarchist. The socialist ideal remains to convert the means of production into the social property of everyone. In other words, everyone should own everything in common. That means that I can get 1/7 billionth of Thomas's code, because let's say there's 7 billion people on the earth, and I'm one person, and you only have a right to 1/7 billionth of it, and I only have a right to 1/7 billionth of it. We all have a right to 1/7 billionth of everything. Maybe we all have a right to 1/7 billionth of ourselves. Maybe we don't even own ourselves, which means we all die, because I don't have the right to, say, scratch my ear, because I have to get the majority vote from 3.5 billion people before I can even do that. We're going to have a lot of committee meetings to decide how to create food if we have this compulsory collectivism. Now, I'm not against collectivism if it's voluntary. There are things like communes and kibbutz and monasteries, places where people share. I'm not against that as long as it's voluntary. But when Chomsky or Kropotkin is going to make it coercive, then I regard this not as anarchy, because anarchy, from the libertarian point of view, is stopping initiatory coercion, but this is initiatory coercion. Kropotkin says ownership of capital will become the common property of society. Well, if people want to pool stuff, that's fine. That's why we have a stock market for that. You can pool vast amounts of money and capital and cooperate with each other. Marx and Engels talk about capital as a collective good. Capital is converted into common property. Factories are instruments of production owned by the state. Well, they talk about the withering away of the state, but one wonders when it's going to wither away. I mean, if it would wither away, that would be great. But if it would wither away, that means, if it means anything, it means that the non-aggression principle is upheld. If the state is the essence of coercion and the state withers away, well then coercion withers away. But these guys still want to use coercion. They want to make everyone collective ownership of all sorts of things, mainly capital goods, maybe not personal goods, and maybe not individual people, but that would be a reductio ad absurdum. In other words, if we should own X in common, why shouldn't we own Y, and why shouldn't we own Z in common? And Y would be personal goods, and Z would be ourselves. How would anarchy work? How would a dispute between, say your name again? Kenny and Tom are now having a dispute. And so we have Kenny and Tom. And let's say Kenny is going to come to Doc Block. That's me. I'm going to be the court. And Doc Clark is going to be Tom's court. Now it's possible. Now Kenny goes to Tom and says, hey Tom, Doc Block is a great judge. Please come with me to Doc Block and he will resolve our dispute. And if Tom agrees, well then Doc Block's decision is final. Or Tom could go to Ken and say, no, Doc Block, he's not really fair. He's a sexist, racist, whatever. Let's go to Doc Clark. Doc Clark is fair. And again, if Ken comes to Doc Clark, all's well. Now, it's possible that each one says, no, I'm not going to the other judge, and they each go to their own room. So Ken comes to me, and Tom comes to Professor Clark. Now, it's possible that Clark and Block will agree with Ken. And again, there's no problem. And it's also possible that Clark and Block will agree with Tom. And each of us have not only got a judge, but we've also got a police force, and you're just individuals, and in coming to us, you agree to be bound by our decision. So again, everything is fine. Now, it's a third possibility is that I'll agree with Tom, and my colleague will agree with Ken. But let's not take that case. Let's suppose that I support Ken, and Clark supports Tom. And now, what do? Ayn Rand says, blank out. He is an anarchist, and we have to have a fight. Not so. According to the Rothbardian, Spooner type libertarian anarchism, am I almost done?
20 seconds.
Give me another minute and give him another minute. I'll just finish this. Maybe.
You can't cheat without rules of the anarchy.
Well,
15 seconds.
he's a tough hombre. I'll continue this during the question period. Thanks for your attention.
I'm kind of perplexed that you're attacking Maoism. I was just at the Left Forum in New York, and I debated the head theorist of the Maoists, Ray Lada. And, I debated him. He's not my position. So I actually think Mao was responsible for more deaths than you actually attribute to. I think he probably was responsible for at least 60 million to 70 million in the Great Leap Forward, plus all the deaths in the Cultural Revolution. So I don't think either of us approves of that. However, I noticed something in common between you and Ray Lada. In some ways, I find your position to be similar to his, in that my objection in many ways is with your practice and with his practice. He had, in fact, he questioned, what was my grand scheme for social transformation? I have several. But to me, the real question is, where are we now? What are we doing? And what is our theory going to do for our practice so that we may move in the direction of what we're aiming at? And there's a question of what that is that we're aiming at. I listed 3 principles of anarchism that, we have something here, the vast majority of anarchists have been engaged in a quest for the free community of solidarity, we might call it. And the second principle is that anarchists are engaged in a struggle against domination. I want to talk, if I have time, I really won't have time to do what I'm trying to do, but I hope at least you'll get interested in it and maybe we can pursue it at another time. The third is a kind of principle of the critique of all forms of domination. That we're struggling, but we're also doing a critique. And we're trying to become more aware of the ways in which domination, exploitation, oppression take place in society. I have a translation of these 3 principles. Principle number 1 is that we're trying to be persons for and with others. Principle number 2 is social justice universally. Principle number 3 is critical thinking universally. Hope it sounds familiar. I feel very fortunate to be at a university that is committed to all 3 principles of anarchism. And I truly mean it. I like to do a show and tell. Some of you, I see some of you already know this. You didn't get my bio, but I've been involved in this stuff for a long time. In fact, I founded New Orleans Young Americans for Freedom in 1963. You may know that group. I was very active in what was called libertarian conservatism at the time. By the late 60s, I had become an anarchist. I founded the New Orleans Libertarian Alliance in 1970. Walter was going to propose that we debate libertarian anarchism versus some other time, but anarchists are called libertarians. All anarchists are called libertarians. The word was invented, and maybe I should ask you if you know. Do you know where the word libertarian was invented? Does anybody know? In New Orleans, in 1857, by an anarchist theorist called Joseph Desjacques. And he was in New Orleans for a number of years. He wrote several texts from here, including a letter to Proudhon. And in the letter to Proudhon, he vehemently attacks the great anarchist philosopher Proudhon for not being an opponent of patriarchy in particular, not being aware of all forms of domination. Anarchists there's a long history of domination. In order to understand where we are in the history of domination, we have to look at where domination began, how it developed. Domination means patriarchy. It means political domination through the state. It means economic domination through the oppression of some people based on the concentration of economic power. It means technological domination. It means the domination of nature. To create an ideology in which a certain type of non-coercion, superficial non-coercion, is abstracted from the whole system of domination means that we are involved in a utopian ideology in which in the future everyone will be free, but the forms of domination continue to exist now. So just if I could quote a few words from Desjacques when he invented the word libertarian. It says, the human being gravitates toward his ideal of perfectibility, liberty. But man and woman, striding with the same step and heart, united and fortified toward their natural destiny, is the anarchic community. He attacks Proudhon for overlooking the place of the domination of women in the question of domination. Patriarchy is the original form of domination. As in ancient society, as domination emerged, the first forms of domination that we began to see were women who in fact were honored, respected, who in fact were responsible for much of the production in tribal society, were subordinated to men. The young became subordinated to the old. Those with increasing economic power based on conquest and a class system subordinated others to their power. We have to look at the evolution of all of these phenomena. Anyway, the word in 1857, it's in French, but Desjacques says that Proudhon was merely libéral, non libertaire. He's just giving you liberalism, not libertarianism. And he says, vous voulez le libre-échange pour le coton et la chandelle. You want free exchange for cotton and candles, but you foresee système protecteur de l'homme contre la femme. You want to protect the domination of women by men. You don't see that kind of domination. That is one of my critiques of these kinds of, I would say, pseudo-libertarians, that their conception of liberty is so narrow that it overlooks most of the problem. Well, I should do my show and tell. Do you know what this is? In my history of starting the New Orleans Libertarian Alliance in 1970, by the 80s I got involved in the international anarchist movement. I've been members of anarchist co-ops, labor movements, affinity groups, direct action, and so forth. You know what it is, right? Anybody know what this is? It's two things. Well, it's a symbol, right? You know what the symbol means? What does the symbol mean, somebody? This is the symbol of anarchism, the international symbol of anarchism. It's an A for anarchism and an O for order. Proudhon said that freedom is the mother, not the daughter of order. That freedom comes from, order emerges freely from free institutions. That's what anarchism is about, the quest for the free community of solidarity. This happens to be made out of the Berlin Wall. In 1989, the Berlin Wall was coming down, so I went there to help tear it down. This was a reinforcing rod from the Berlin Wall. A friend of mine made it into an anarchy symbol. Let me focus on two things. I guess I have a few minutes. One is what I've already mentioned. We have to understand the system of domination. Private defense forces, for instance. Right now, there are parts of Pakistan in which the state has no power. Several million people are basically involved merely in the market. They are debt slaves. They are trapped in various economic enterprises in which the owners have people with machine guns preventing them from leaving because they owe debts to the owners. The state is not involved. This is, by the way, illegal in Pakistan, but the state has retreated, allowing the market to operate and operate with its own private defense forces. Five what?
5 minutes.
Minutes, not seconds, okay. I'm not predicting anything about what Walter's saying. What I'm saying is in the real world we have forms of domination. Millions of people are slaves right now in Pakistan, basically not to the state, but to private employers with private defense forces. In the real world, hundreds of millions of women are subordinated to men by patriarchy. In the real world, we have a system of technological domination that is really never mentioned by what I call right-wing libertarians. In fact, I was one. A guy named Tuchili wrote a book called Libertarianism, the Right-Wing Alternative. I adhered to that at one time. Right? So I use right-wing libertarian as the term. I think this right-wing libertarianism does not look at those forms of domination, does not look at the ways in which the system of technology enslaves us, and that we have to radically break with dominating forms of technology if we want to be free. We have to smash patriarchy if we want to be free. The state is not only a political institution out there. As Gustav Landau, one of the great communitarian anarchist philosophers, said, the state is a relationship. And to undo the state, you have to undo all the statist relationships. You have to change your personality. You have to undo your own racism, patriarchy, statism, machismo, instrumental rationality, all the forms of domination that are embodied in our character structure. That's what anarchism is about. Anarchism is a way of life. It's a life for freedom. And I truly mean that it really is what Loyola commits itself to. Whether or not we do a good job at it all the time, I think it really is about overcoming egocentrism, overcoming the will to dominate, overcoming the will to use others, and instead creating free communities in which we have solidarity, in which we practice mutual aid, in which we learn how to cooperate. So my message really is this. Not that you accept some utopia. I believe in utopia. I believe, by the way, I'm a utopian and a topian. I'm a 10th generation New Orleanian. My family's been here for over 290 years. I absolutely identify with this community. I want to fight for it. I want to preserve it. I care about the people in this community. Anarchism to me is not some abstract ideology. It is being for the community. So what I would like to propose to you is that if you want to be an anarchist, get together and create free communities. Create good relationships with one another. Begin as the IWW, which is the anarchist syndicalist labor union I belong to, says, create the new society within the shell of the old. First create it within yourself, then create it among small groups of friends, create it in neighborhoods, build it up from the bottom. Anarchism does not reject all democratic decision-making. Anarchism rejects mass democracy. Anarchism is a practice. It's not an ideology. It's not an absolutism. We don't say we can never use the state for anything. It's around. I would imagine even Walter is probably driven on streets that the state has built. So you're complicit in the state in many ways. Of course, I pay taxes because I'm coerced also, but I also use many things, instrumentalize the state in many ways. There are some policies, there are some structural reforms of the state that lead in the direction of possibilities for freedom. I use capitalism. I absolutely reject capitalism. I think it's a monstrous system. It's murdering the biosphere. His economics has no way of dealing with the biggest problems, not building some road, saving the biosphere. No one's going to own the bacteria, which are the major life forms on this planet. The zooplankton, the phytoplankton. The complexity of the biosphere is beyond any kind of capitalist rationality. Capitalism is destroying the biosphere. It is ecocidal. If we don't gain control, we are doomed. And nothing Walter has ever said explains how capitalism can solve that problem merely through market mechanisms and the pursuit of economic self-interest. Actually, I'll just stop there.
I certainly didn't mean to say that John is a Maoist and he's guilty for mass deaths. I was just listing numbers of people that governments have killed. I'm in favor of domination. When I play chess with somebody, I want to dominate the hell out of them. Nothing wrong with that. Two boxers are in the ring. They want to dominate each other. As long as they hit above the belt and don't bite each other's ears, that's okay. That's compatible with voluntarism. They're agreed to be in the ring. They agreed to play chess. Nothing wrong with domination per se. There's something wrong with coercive domination, but not domination per se. I used to play in an orchestra. I played the violin, and every time I made a mistake, the guy would hit the podium and say, block, shape up. The wind instruments are told when to breathe. If they breathe at the wrong time, it tells them, shape up, you're playing the trumpet wrong. You should breathe when I say you should breathe. You can't get more dominant than that, but it's voluntary, so it's okay. Nothing wrong with domination. Patriarchy is horrible. There are cases in Pakistan and Canada where some guy killed his two daughters because they wore a miniskirt or something. They were 18 and 19 years old. That's horrible. That's coercive. That's a violation of the libertarian ethos. But there's nothing wrong with domination per se. Nothing wrong with the concentration of business. I teach a course right now at I.O. Some businesses get bigger because they give us a better product at a lower price. Walmart, Burger King, they're all fine companies, nothing wrong with them. They dominate the market, they're highly concentrated, so what? Now, if the way they got their power was through state action, through what some people call rent-seeking and I would call plunder-seeking, well then that's a horse of a different color. But you have to make that distinction. There's nothing wrong with capitalism, laissez-faire capitalism, there's plenty wrong with crony capitalism. And if you don't make that distinction, you know, there's that joke, do you know the difference between a bathroom and a living room? And if they say no, you say, well, don't come to my house. Well, if you don't know the difference between crony capitalism and laissez-faire capitalism, don't get into political economy. Yes, certain kinds of capitalism, crony capitalism or fascism, are evil and they violate the libertarian axiom or the libertarian principle of non-invasion, but other kinds are innocuous. Poor Bill Gates, he started in his garage, he made a computer, it got bigger. He didn't violate anyone's rights. Every time he sold a computer, the people who bought those computers from him valued the computer more than the price. They gained, he got rich. What's wrong with that? I'm not a right-wing libertarian. I'm no more right than 2 minutes. God, time goes by fast. I'm not a right-winger, I'm not a conservative, I'm not a left-winger, I'm not a socialist, I'm a libertarian. And I resist being labeled right-wing. I teach a course here on environmental economics where I try to explain that the reason we have pollution is because of the state. If we had private property rights, then sending forth garbage into the air, onto other people's lungs and onto their property would be a trespass, and a trespass is like me grabbing Tom's coat. it would be illicit, it would be illegal in a free market society. You don't have to change all of your relationships as far as I'm concerned. Just keep your goddamn mitts off of other people's property and their persons. You don't have to get different kind of relationships. You can just carry on as you've been, but don't grab other people's property either directly as in private theft or by voting for governments that engage in this on a massive scale. Yes, I believe that we should be persons with and for others. We should be friendly. We should be nice. The main thing of being friendly and nice is keeping your mitts off of their persons and their property. If you don't do that, you can't be too friendly and too nice. Social justice seems to me like socialist justice. Hayek has written brilliantly on this. I don't favor social justice because social justice means pretty much egalitarianism. And if you want to do voluntary egalitarianism, that's fine. But coercive egalitarianism is a horse of a different color. If we force people to do these things, then that's very bad. John favors labor unions. Labor unions, as far as I'm concerned, are criminal gangs. Because they do two things, one of which is legitimate and one of which is illegitimate. The legitimate thing is they engage in a mass quit. The illegitimate thing, shut up, Dan. The illegitimate thing they do is they try to beat up scabs. And that seems to me like hate speech.
There's a fundamental question about what life is about, what our human life is about, what we're doing here. And see some Buddhist friends. And I teach a course on Buddhist philosophy, and sometimes I keep saying, go back to basics. Buddhism begins with there is suffering. And sometimes in class, I say, well, you should know this, because what's on the wall of every classroom at Loyola? There's a cross, which is about suffering and about hope in the center, at the core of suffering, which is what Buddhism is about. But I've noticed that this is the one place where Jesus isn't on the wall. Here in the business school, I don't know what happened, so I can't I don't know. I mean, every other classroom it's in, so I can't use that example here. But if I did, and sometimes an absence tells you more about reality than a presence. Absences are very powerful. So what is anarchism? It's what Buddhism is about. It's what Christianity is about. It's what all the great wisdom traditions are about. There is suffering. It's not about being nice and friendly. Our responsibility is not to be nice and friendly. That's on the surface. I mean, I know Walter doesn't agree, but I truly do agree that our responsibility is love and compassion, and really caring about the victims of domination, even if we are in a privileged position in which we do not suffer the way some others suffer. Although many who are economically privileged do suffer a great deal, and they're all around us. So that's a big difference, I think, in our view. Again, I mean, Walter wants to, I'm in the IWW, which is the Revolutionary Union. It's not the AFL-CIO, but we have a big difference about exploitation. I mean, we believe that what people produce is stolen from them, that the economic system is not just. If you believe that the capitalist class deserves what it has taken, and that people who do not labor, but merely have ownership of pieces of paper, which give them title to the wealth of others, the labor of others, if you think it's just, well then maybe you're on the side. But if you think maybe there's a problem, that the people who write the laws, by the way, systems of property have not been based on anything, Walter says. They've been based on a coercive state. So even if in his utopia everybody has what they deserve, in our world, the rich have it because they have written the laws, and they are increasingly concentrating their wealth by rewriting the laws. In other words, it is the coercive state that's responsible for their wealth and for the constant 2 what?
2 minutes.
Okay. Because you told him 5 seconds. I just didn't know whether I was doing the same thing. So there's a big question about, what is domination? We really can't go into it in any detail, but systems of domination are very complicated. I mean, I have a social theory in which I talk about institutions, ideology, the social imaginary, and the social ethos, or habitus or practices of people, and how power works in society and how liberation might work in society. If anybody's interested, we can talk about it some other time. But I think it's telling that when Walter looks at examples of patriarchal domination, he goes to Pakistan and Canada, but here, women are afraid to walk the streets. One of the largest causes of injuries to women is being beaten within the household. We have forms of media which dehumanize women, which attack women, which encourage crime against women. We don't have to go anywhere to see how patriarchy operates. We need to be working on it at Loyola University because it's within the character structure of people and it's within the institutions of society. The absence of recognition of patriarchy here is very telling in Walter's comment. That's it. Or if we both sit here. Okay, now the fun begins.
Dan, do you want to come up and lead the MC?
Sure. If anyone has questions for the two debaters, hands. Start here.
Dr. Block, during your last rebuttal, you mentioned,
I was just going to straighten out. Okay, that's fine.
you mentioned that you feel that there's no need for us to examine our relationships or to rework our relationships in the way that Dr. Clark mentioned. And you said, I believe we can continue in the way that we have been continuing, and it should be fine given if we keep our hands off of each other's person and property. But hasn't us continuing in the manner that we've continued gotten us to where we are now without examining our relationships with each other and with ourselves? In other words, haven't we been just going the way we've been going, and hasn't that gotten us to the point where we're having this conversation to begin with? Things are so wrong.
What I meant to say is that we don't need a top-down reinvigoration of our psyches or anything else. We just need to uphold the libertarian axiom of non-aggression. And if we did, certainly there'd be no wife beating or anything like that, or women would be free to walk in the streets without fear of being beaten up or molested, whether on the street or in the house. That would be a paradigm case of violation of the libertarian axiom. So I certainly oppose that. But what I meant was, you don't have to come out against domination if the domination is voluntary. Voluntary domination is fine. Coercive domination is not. What I get from John is domination is per se problematic, and the human psyche deeply embedded within it is dominant, and that's bad. And I don't see that at all. There's certain areas of our lives where domination is fine. As I say, when I play chess, I want to get the guy. I want to dominate him, or I want to checkmate him. That's pretty domination, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Can I have a follow-up to that, now that I understand a little bit more of what...
John, you have comments?
Yeah. Just very briefly, in many ways, voluntary domination is worse than coerced domination. I did 2 books on the great anarchist philosopher Elie Wiesel, who spent years in Louisiana and wrote a lot about slavery and fought against racism because he learned about it here. He said he admired the slave who resisted. The slave, he couldn't stand to stay here because of slavery. He had to leave after a few years. To accept domination is to internalize the system. To fight against it is to reject it. So the fact that someone, the willing slave, to me is the most horrifying phenomenon.
That is actually where my follow-up was headed, and was that distinction, which is to say that, there are women who are members of this society, there are, minorities and economically repressed people who are members of the society, who, I guess, in a way, voluntarily decided to be coerced by virtue of being born into a society of patriarchy, racism, and economic oppression. But is that not domination, and should we not examine that? I mean, you're born into a society that has patriarchy. As a woman, you're in the society whether you voluntarily choose to be in it or not.
Well, I'm not against examining it, but I'm in favor of obliterating it because it violates the very paradigm case of what the libertarian non-aggression principle is all about. If men can beat up women and rape them and stuff like that, that's not voluntary. That should be ended. It should be studied, perhaps, and examined. I'm not against that, but the bottom line is it's got to be ended. Now, with regard to slavery, I'm now going to say something that if I'm quoted out of context is going to sound very bad, but I favor certain kinds of slavery. I'm doing it. I favor certain kinds of slavery, voluntary slavery. For example, my son has a dread disease, and Dan here has long wanted me to be his slave, and he's very rich, and he's going to give me the $5 million that I need to save my son's life, and then I'll be his slave, voluntary slave. Because why do I do it? Because I value my son's life more than my freedom. Is that just? Yeah, it's just. I gain from it because I value my son's life more than the freedom he gains from it because he values me as a slave more than the $5 million. What's wrong with voluntary slavery? I don't think anything is wrong with voluntary slavery. Now, coercive slavery, where somebody grabs somebody against their will, this voluntary slavery is a theoretical construct. I don't know that it ever existed, although indentured servitude is sort of like that. But the kind of slavery that John is talking about, of course I oppose that. Second to murder, slavery is perhaps the most egregious violation of the non-aggression principle.
Could I just say a little word on that? Because I think there's a direct contradiction in your position. On the one hand, you said that your position about voluntary agreement would mean something like wife beating would be eliminated. But on the other hand, some people we know that sadomasochists, for instance, sometimes like to beat each other, torture, etc. So it seems to me that if you believe in voluntarism, there might be many cases of voluntary beating, right?
Yeah.
True or false?
True.
Okay, that's a contradiction.
Well, look, no, it's not a contradiction.
No, you said it wouldn't exist.
Well, let me finish.
Please.
I did mention boxing. Boxing is voluntary sadomasochism. By the way, you know what the joke is? The sadist says, no, the masochist says to the sadist, beat me. And the sadist says, no.
Thank you.
It's not very funny. Voluntary sadomasochism, look, if people want to get together and whip each other, as long as they're adults and there's no coercion, that should be legal. Now, it's not my thing. I don't think it's particularly moral. I think it's a little disgusting, but that's a different issue. The question is, should it be legal or not? And for the libertarian, anything between consenting adults. Capitalist acts between consenting adults, too.
Next question.
Going on along that same thought, what happens if we have species like whales or the fish or the trees that can't necessarily go to the court system, in our court system, and say, we don't want voluntarily to be slaughtered for your consumption. So how does, how would the libertarian, like, so if we have, that's obviously not voluntarily. The fish isn't willingly giving up his life for you. So if you could debate that idea, that saying that I'm wrong and that.
Ordinarily, we serve chicken at these things. None of those chickens agreed to be eaten and killed. Well, maybe some, but most of them haven't. This philosophy is for human beings, not for chickens or whales or any of those other guys. I'm focusing on putting the blinders on and I'm looking at what is just for human beings. And I am not a vegetarian. I think it's justified to kill cows and chickens and whales or any other of those creatures. And I think it's justified to use chimpanzees on cancer research or whatever it is. That's my own view. Because libertarianism is an ethic or a philosophy for human beings.
Comments on those, John?
Yeah, well, a bigger thing. First, I believe in the right to arm bears. But if that doesn't work, I think that maybe we should get involved. And I reject this alternative as a false dilemma, that you're either for humans or you're for something else. That we are, in fact, part of the biosphere. And one of our problems today is that probably at least 10,000 species are going extinct, largely not because of states primarily, although the people who are doing it are supported by states, but because of the market. Most of life on Earth is concentrated in ecosystems such as tropical rainforests and to a certain extent temperate rainforests. They're all going to be gone in this century. Much of life on Earth is being extinguished. This is a big problem. The market approaches do not have a convincing answer to how this is going to be stopped just by consumer choice. There's just nothing going on that is going in the direction of reversing this. Even all the debate right now, and even attempts to make agreements between states, is doing virtually nothing to reverse anything. The process is accelerating. The biodiversity, we're in the 6th great mass extinction of life on Earth. This is the big news on planet Earth. If we don't do something about it, we won't be debating the market versus anything.
In order for there to be a market, there have to be private property rights. All of these cases are cases where there's no private property rights. The rainforest in Brazil is owned. The rainforest in Brazil is owned by the government. If it was private, people would take care of it.
Okay, say it.
Can I finish?
We're getting ready to say it.
The whales happen, and the fish happen to live in the oceans, which are not private property yet. My next book will be on privatizing the oceans, rivers, and lakes. If we had private property for these things, and if you want to hear more about this, take my course on environmental economics. The reason for the environmental problems is lack of private property rights. Of course, if you have no private property rights, like in the rainforest or in the waters, you're going to have the tragedy of the commons, and then you're going to have problems. But the problem is not capitalism, it's lack of capitalism.
Brief response. This is exactly the opposite of reality. And look at reality, study history. This is an abstract theory. It's the danger of abstraction. If you look at the rainforest, when the rainforest was the communal lands of tribal people, it was preserved. It has been transformed into private property by the farmers moving into the rainforest, primarily by ranchers, taking over hundreds of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of acres individually, and operating them as a fiefdom. And being supported, of course, by the state, as the capitalists always will be. And that's within 12 years. This has turned from the richest ecosystem in the world to a wasteland by private property, not by a state, other than the extent to which capitalists use it. And they will do it with private, in fact, they have private defense forces. They're called death squads. And they're used against anybody who resists it, like Chico Mendes, the saint of the rainforest, who was killed by those people who are doing the actual destruction. We can name names. He gives you an abstract theory.
This is
Next
not,
question,
this
yellow jacket.
Yeah, I want to return to this example of voluntary slavery. It kind of reminds me of your point earlier about the how you can choose between the lesser of two evils, but you can't actually avoid statism at all. It kind of seems like in this situation, you're choosing to sell yourself into slavery to avoid what you perceive to be a greater evil, great violence or harm being done to, I guess, your son or your child in this instance. I mean, is that really that different from saying that, say, slavery as we had it in America, that these slaves, it was voluntary because when they were given orders, they chose to follow the orders. They didn't, they could have resisted, but it would have meant great violence to themselves and their families. And so they chose to obey orders rather than resisting. I mean, it seems to me the problem here is access to power. You don't have the access to whatever medicine it is that your son needs because economic distribution is not in any way even or fair.
before I answer that, I just wanted to say that I agree with what John says about the rainforest, but that was crony capitalism of fascism. It wasn't free enterprise that I'm advocating. With regard to this, if you can't distinguish coercion from voluntariness, we've got problems philosophically. Look, just because the slave obeyed, because if he didn't obey, he'd get whipped, doesn't make it voluntary. Whereas in the case of me and Dan, it was totally voluntary. I approached him.
No, it wasn't.
I said, please make me your slave. Give me $5 million for my son's operation. I said, give me the $5 million for my son's operation. It was totally voluntary. If you can't distinguish between rape and seduction, between voluntary trade and theft, you shouldn't be in political economy. In political economy, that is the most basic distinction. And if you think that the slavery that we had before 1861 or 1865 was voluntary, that's grotesque.
The coercion here, though, is the violence that will be done to your son if you do not take the
My
taxi.
son had a disease. It's not as if Dan shot him first. If Dan shot him first and now I needed the $5 million to save him, that would be an analogy. But in my case of my son, Dan didn't.
Going back to the patriarchy discussion, I appreciate that domestic abuse and violent sexual crime are pretty cut and dry violations of the non-aggression principle, but I don't understand what your view of anarchism, what mechanism that has to eliminate those things.
Ah, here it is. Here's the mechanism.
Yeah, but we've got courts under the state, that doesn't fix it either.
Those are government courts. What I was saying is if Doc Clark and Doc Block disagreed as to the debate between Ken and Tom, there would be two kinds of courts. There would be legitimate courts and bandit courts. The distinction between them is that the bandit courts, like the mafia, would say, oh, my way or the highway, let's fight. The legitimate courts would anticipate this. John and I would say, hey, we're both judges. It might be that one day, maybe not yet, but one day we'll be on the opposite side of the debate. And what should we do then? And what we'll do is we'll let Dan decide. Or it could be somebody else. The point is that we would be a legitimate court, and that would be the way we'd resolve it. The bandit courts, we'd have to fight all the time. And fighting is more expensive than negotiation. And therefore, we predict that in terms of economic survival, the legitimate courts would survive, not the illegitimate courts. Certainly not these illegitimate courts of the sort that John is talking about in Brazil, where these people are just death squads. That would be the bandit courts. Those would not be legitimate courts. The legitimate courts, the cases there would be the law merchant or American Arbitration Association. Dan has done a lot of research on when people disagree over credit cards, how do they resolve these things? Usually it doesn't go through the state, it goes through private courts and private defense agencies.
Just a very brief. Anarchists, as opposed to Maoists or right-wing libertarians, really take seriously the principle that power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that it doesn't matter whether it's political power within the state or economic power within capitalism. We have to find mechanisms of dispersing power and keeping it under control. So that if, in fact, even if the land barons didn't have the system they have now, even if they had private courts or private defense forces, if you have concentrated power, you're still going to have domination. That's the anarchist position.
Can I follow up before we move on? Okay. Mark Hoppus, you're wearing what are you
That's all right. So you can buy bison burgers. I found that really interesting recently. And now the interesting thing was bisons were going extinct a while back. Like 19th century with like the whole like travel west and stuff like that. People would just pick up and shoot bisons on the way west. Now, with people owning bisons, the bison population is actually coming back. So I mean, kind of like that's sort of an instance where private property is helping the ecosystem, isn't it?
No.
Why not?
No, it's actually hurting, in part because it leads people to give that kind of argument. Because ecology is about systems. Ecology is not we know that species survival centers are not the way for species to survive. Intact ecosystems are the way for species to survive. If 10,000 species are going extinct every year, and one species, which may not even be going extinct anyway, is just more numerous because there's a demand for eating it, that really has no ecological consequence at all, except to confuse people.
Well, I agree fully with that question. The movie Dances with Wolves, total socialist dribble. The key point is that when you own it, you take care of it. When you don't own it, you don't take care of it. You have the tragedy of the commons. That's a reason why the whales are going extinct and the bison used to be going extinct until we had private property. Now, you can't save every species. There are zillions of species. In my class on environmental economics, we discussed what the optimal number of species is, and the optimal number of species is not necessarily all the ones that we now have. That is the
How many are there?
That is the optimal number of species for human beings' welfare, because I am human-centric. I'm a humanist.
Brendan.
Going back to private court systems, we take a case, actually this ties in with environmental degradation also. We take the case of Chevron taking toxic acids from Texaco and Ecuador, and how the indigenous people within the region have taken Chevron to court. In the Ecuadorian court, the court came out in support of the people, said that Texaco owed them billions of dollars worth of reparations. Chevron said no, took the case to court in the U.S. U.S. said billions of dollars reparations. Texaco once again denied it. And then under WTO laws, they're hiring 3 corporate lawyers to take that court to international private court. And then they're going to decide from there. How does that address anything? Like, isn't that like they're playing to the back pocket and those people aren't going to receive the reparations and the environments can continue to degrade?
Well, I agree with this point, and I very much disagree with John when he says that economic power, like political power, are both, we have to be careful of both of them, they're both dangerous. I see economic power, or wealth, as innocuous without political power. In other words, when Bill Gates earned his money honestly on the market, he earned $1 zillion, and he had plenty of economic power, which is a silly phrase, it should just be called wealth. He had no power over anyone. If somebody else, Google, came along with something, he could have driven them out of business. At one time, IBM was the only company in computers, and they've lost their economic power. The key is political power. If you have political power, then what you do is you restrict entry and you pass laws against your competitors. So without political power, economic power is not only not innocuous, but it's beneficial. All it means is wealth. Who can be against wealth? We're all supposed to be against poverty. Well, the way to cure poverty is to get rich. There's nothing wrong with being rich if you earn it honestly, and then you don't turn your money back to Washington, D.C. Look, out of the richest 10 counties in the country, 7 of them are all around Washington, D.C. Why? Because political power is very vicious. But if people refrain from using political power, economic power is nothing. Look, all you can do if you have economic power is plead with customers to come to your store. Walmart has economic power, very little political power. All they can do is plead with people to come to their store. If I come up with a better store and I put them into bankruptcy, there's nothing they can do with purely economic power. They have to go to political power to stop.
That does not address the question at all.
John?
Okay, I debated with the Maoists, but there's one quote from Marx I really like. The greatest wealth for the human being is the other human being, which I agree with. And also, the other great wealth is the wealth of the natural world that has been handed down to us without our effort, that comes to us freely as a gift, and that we're destroying. And I want to pose a big question about this idea of everybody needs to own everything in nature. I don't know if Walter knows something. Please take conservation biology if you can possibly take that course while you're at Loyola. If not, take a good ecology course. But you know, there are at least 10 million species on this planet, probably 50 million species. There are enormous numbers of individuals within those species. The most common animal species are